Hello, team. Today we're going to be speaking about something that I'm pretty sure many of us grapple with, particularly as parents, as well as the influence that it's likely to have over us as leaders, over our team. And that's the topic on schooling, schools in particular, and I won't give it away, but the people within the schools. I'm sure we can all remember back, gosh, it's half a dozen years ago almost now, looking from the outside in at the pandemic, the effect that the pandemic had, as well as now technology. It's like the perfect storm, if you like. The schools spending their time helping the children to catch up from the pandemic, trying to integrate technology. It's becoming quite the monumental task. And it begs the question, what's the most important ingredient for a school, not just to survive, but to truly thrive in this new era? The answer, according to our guest at least, might surprise you. It's not a piece of software, it's not a new policy, it's a radical rethink of how schools find and hire their people. So, to help us unpack this powerful idea and to show us a better way, we're thrilled to be joined by a true expert, veteran international educator and author, Kelley Ridings. Kelley, welcome to the ET Project.
Thank you, Wayne. It's a great to be here, and I appreciate the chance to talk with you and your audience.
Um, if we cast our mind back to, we're both sitting in China, so we know this pandemic very well.
Yes.
The beginning of 2020, essentially, a little bit before for us, but around the beginning of 2020. So we're coming up to 5, 6 years after the pandemic, or you know, since the beginning of the pandemic. What was the global impact? We all saw it as parents, or those of us that are parents. We saw the impact of the virtual learning with the teacher on the other end of the screen. How did the schools cope with it in the first instance?
Well, that was quite a moment being in history for everybody around the world, for sure. But it really was a challenge for those of us in schools because here in China, we were just beginning the Chinese New Year holiday, which is the major holiday in this country, which is about a month long. And so people had just gotten out for the break and had spread out around the world, not just the staff, of course, but obviously families and students had traveled as well. And so people were spread out everywhere. And then here in China, when this problem became worse, the government had said, okay, we're not going to have school, it's going to be online. And so here we were spread out around the globe, and we had to uh, pivot to having online school, which was going to be a challenge, of course, to be able to figure out how that worked because we weren't an online school. And we some people had their devices with them, their computers, their laptops. They were able to do this. Some people weren't, didn't have them rather, and so it was a bit of a challenge for that. As the problem worsened, it as the numbers spread and so on, we knew that there was going to be some issues and trying to then figure out how to deal with the people all across the world that were facing these issues, people within our school. We had told people that the staff that they needed to start returning to the country, and at some point most people had, and but by March 18th it had uh, the government had closed the borders to foreigners and so most of our staff had returned, but some had not, and families. And so then we had to deal with, okay, now what do we do? And trying, even though we were online at that point, we knew at some point we would return to being an in school, in on campus school. And so how do we deal with that? And we had already hired people for the new year. And then
Mm.
we thought, oh, if the borders are closed, how are we going to get these people in? Are we going to be able to? And so we had to deal with a lot of different situations. And we had we had a general plan, but then you had to have a plan A. I mean, literally, we had a plan A, a plan B, a plan B1, a plan C, plan D, plan D1. We had a lot of different individual items that we had to deal with for every person because obviously we're dealing with people. We're not just dealing with a event or a thing. And then we had a lot of students and families as well that were abroad. And how do we handle that? And even when the the lockdown situation that we had in the country had abated and we went back to online or in-person school, we still had to deal with, okay, we've got a lot of families that are abroad. We had some staff who were abroad, and then we had some people that were coming to campus. Some students weren't comfortable. Some families weren't comfortable sending their kids to campus, even though they were here in Shanghai and in China. And so that was a real challenge. And we were able to move through it. We had to be incredibly flexible in order to do that, Wayne. I'm sure you understand. You went through the lockdown that first time, the first year,
Mm.
and it was really one of the most challenging times in terms of leadership that I've ever experienced. Not one of it, it was the most for sure.
Yeah.
And other leaders in the school, we had to teach classes. We had in order for people that weren't able to come back. And that, it was just all kinds of things. So we had to deal with technology, with personnel, with enrollment numbers and dealing with families and providing support. We had a lot of staff who were uh, not able to come back and they were planning to move to another place anyway. And so then we had to basically move all of those staff and pack up everything. So we had to create a team in order to help to move them out of their apartments and move all of their personal belongings, but still do it in a way that's sensitive to their personal needs and not invading their privacy. And it just all kinds of things that we would never have thought of in normal situations in normal life. And plus, you're dealing just with people when they're scared and they didn't know what was going on. It was at a very basic, the Maslow's hierarchy and the basic needs of survival and food and
Yeah.
safety and health. And people react very differently in those situations. So, the whole gamut of issues that we had to deal with, it was incredibly difficult. But, we came together as a staff. I don't, uh, can't even imagine, having gone through that and how the staff just responded so well to trying to help and trying to just make do with what we had to do. And, so that was really encouraging to see. And uh, and the situations worked out for the most part. Some people weren't
Mm.
able to come back into the country, but by November, those who wanted to come back did. And so that first year. So that kind of gives a year in a nutshell for that, I guess. What a year.
Yeah. And that's not even touching on some of the challenges that you would have faced from outside, right? So you would have had teachers who were trying to bring, particularly in the primary school arena, bring
Mhm.
students together to keep them focused enough on video to listen to the lesson. You have in both our cases, we're talking about international schools, so you have students from multiple countries who may be learning in one language, but it may not be their native language. So you've got all those challenges over the video. And then of course we're in China, and I think most of our listeners know that the focus on education by the parents in China is quite extreme. And the expectation on the school to be able to provide that education at the same level as if the children were in the school must have added enormous pressure to the whole gamut of
Yeah.
problems and challenges you were facing. So um, it, what I was really intrigued by was how quickly the whole schooling system was able to pivot to a fairly virtual environment. How
Mhm.
how many years prior to the pandemic had this transition been happening? Because it couldn't have just happened on a dime, right? It must have been happening over the years before.
Well, yeah, to speak to your points, I mean, for the first part about the families and the situations for them, that was, these are people that mostly were working themselves and they had, they had their own jobs and their own careers that they were trying to do, and they had to go online as well. And then when they had young kids, the kids, you know, obviously when they're very young, the attention span, just in terms of their developmental abilities. Kids can't just focus for hours on end on a computer, and they need stimulation from play and the people around them and interacting with others, and it was really challenging. And so for families, it was who weren't used to that, and parents who weren't used to, and grandparents who weren't used to sitting there with their kids and trying to keep them focused, it was really, really tough. And so that
Yeah,
first year was very hard for the families. And so most did fine, and they just went with it, but there were some times where it was just really just too much, and the pressures that they were facing, plus they had their own economic situations, their businesses that weren't doing as well, and in some cases, and so it was just hard for them. And and it was not easy for older kids either, because they faced isolation, social isolation. They weren't used to working online. They had to deal with all of the things that were happening at home and didn't really have outlets to be able to do things, and so it was very tough for them. um, and it's nobody expected this to happen, and we had to always come up with all kinds of different situations. So when you ask the question about how long did we have were we preparing for being online? Well, I mean, I think there were probably components that we had that were online. Like we had uh, parents could look online and could find their kids' grades and things like that, and we already had a system in place for that.
right.
So, that we had some communication channels. We were using an online program. It's called Learning Management System. So we already had something like that in place so that individual families could, and kids also could see what was the assignments that they had, and so on. But, we had to come up with how do you teach online? And that was a challenge at first, it's different. It's not the same thing as trying to
Right.
teach face to face in a classroom, a
Mm,
regular bricks and mortar classroom is just not the same. And so the having to come up with how to do that took time. And so I can't say, I wish I could say that the first year was super successful with that, because it wasn't as much so as we would have liked. We got through it, and that was the important thing, and people made it through and did what they needed to do. But then what we did the second after the first year had ended, first school year had ended, we then talked about, okay, what could we do differently? So then the next year we had an online training that we used for every staff member in the school, all teachers and all administrators. And we did a course that was offered through Coursera, through the University of New South Wales. And so we did a 19-hour course on how to teach online.
right.
And that was just fantastic, because we learned so much about how to do that.
Mm,
And so then when we had our second set of lockdown in the school year 21 20 20 21 22,
yeah.
I think that was right, then we were prepared,
Mm,
and we were able to do that pretty well. And we had a lot more, well, and parents and everybody had understood the situation a lot more. They were more used to it, and students and everything, we were able to prepare and be pretty successful with that. Thanks in
Mm.
part to planning and preparation. We knew some things were going to be happening, so we, already had a system in place to support people personally, professionally, helping them to have the systems in place so they could be successful.
I suspect I know the answer to the question I'm about to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. So from the human elements, teachers in general, teachers and staff of schools, as a consequence of the pandemic, but also through the introduction of technology, do you see teachers and their role in the future becoming more important, or do you see that starting to subside as technology comes into the environment?
Well, this is certainly one of the interesting debate questions, that's in the world of education today. I'm very much on the side that a teacher cannot be replaced. And so the teacher is not just about knowledge. That's just one component of what a teacher is doing, but a
Right.
teacher is providing nurturing to students. It's helping kids to grow up, not just to be academically smart, but also to be personally
Mm.
responsible, to be good people, to care about one another. And there's an affective part to what teachers do and
Yeah.
what educators do that there's not going to be any online system or AI system or robot that is going to be able to replace that. And so that part is irreplaceable. And so yes, can students look online and can find information and can use AI and so on and absolutely.
Mm.
But there's a in-person component and a caring component that would absolutely not be there at all through technology. It's impossible to have. And so teachers can be facilitators. School leaders can facilitate using technology. And so we've learned so much about how to use technology. Like, for example, right now, today, what are we doing? We're sitting here having a conversation on Zoom. We're not in the same cities. We're in the same country, but we're not in the same cities. And we're able to have this conversation. And we've talked before, you and I have talked before online. We've had so we've had this opportunity to do this that we would not have had 5+ years ago before this
Right.
happened. Even though Zoom was around, we didn't necessarily know that technology super
Mm.
well. And now nobody even thinks anything of it. And in fact, Zoom, the I is actually a verb. Hey, let's have a Zoom.
Exactly
And
right.
so it's a very different world, and I think it's opened up a lot of possibilities. And that's what happens with change, and that's what the change
Mm.
process is about. It's we don't go back to doing things exactly the way they were, and it's not going to completely change everything that we did. It's modified certain things, and we've come up with new ways of doing it, and we have now lots of different new things that we didn't have
Mm.
5, 6 years ago. And
Absolutely.
so that's where technology is going to have changed education, I think, is just the way that we deliver, the way that we can learn is different. But
Right.
replacing the needs, the affective needs, and even also, Wayne, not every student does terrifically, not every teacher does terrifically teaching online. Some can
Mm.
do it, some cannot. And I don't mean it's that they don't want to, it's just that's not how they're hardwired. They don't
Yeah. Yeah.
we generally want to work in a world where we can interact with other people, and some people handle it better to be working online than others, and some thrive with it and some don't. And that's just the way the world works. So I really don't see technology replacing teachers or schools. Uh, it would be very difficult to do, I think.
Right. Well, that's a perfect segue actually into your book. So you've written a book called The Gift Hiring Method. GIFT is an acronym. We'll get into that shortly. But what was the impetus for writing the book in the first place? Was it sparked by the pandemic and AI, or was it just a culmination of what you've experienced over your career?
Well, I think it was more of a culmination of what I've experienced throughout my career, and obviously the pandemic was part of that.
Mm,
And but I think that it came. It started actually. The process was around 2014, 15 school year was when
right,
I began contemplating the ideas of hiring in a very different way. And I wrote a book in 21 about called Teacher Lead Abroad, which is about how to find dream jobs in international schools. So that was from the teacher, the candidate perspective, teachers and leaders who wanted to find work in international schools.
mm,
But I also knew that at some point I wanted to write a book about how to uh, create a system within a school for leaders who wanted to find quality candidates to hire in schools in general, not just international schools.
right.
And so that first book, The Teacher Leader Abroad, I actually finished that during the pandemic. I was
Okay.
writing that at that time. And then the second book, The Gift Hiring Method, is the companion book to it. So it's a series, and
Mm,
so this is kind of the companion, but from the point of view of the leaders within the school. And so the processes that I have worked with over the years have been through a lot of study, through practice, through evolving our systems so that we could hire people that were going to be quality candidates, quality teachers to upgrade the school and to uplift the school so that they people that were going to match with what the school's ideals are, and also to be able to find candidates that can support that and they want to do it because it's just naturally who they are. And so we had to find the attitudes, the right attitudes for people. And so developing that took several years in order for that to happen.
mm.
And lo and behold, there comes the book, The Gift Hiring Method, as a result.
And as I mentioned, GIFT is an acronym or a statement, if you like. What does it stand for?
Yeah, so the gift method is about gathering information and facts thoughtfully. And so the whole process of GIFT, GIFT, is about finding candidates who have the right fit and the right attitude for the school. And so, as a school leadership, we have to create a system that supports finding the facts and the information that we need in order to support our students, our school, our community. And every school is different. We all have different needs and interests. No two schools are exactly alike, none. And so they're all set up for different reasons. They all have different needs. They have different motivations. They've got goals and strategies that are quite unique. And so every school has to figure out what their school work culture is and what they are about. And then they design a process, design questions for the interview that are going to help to find
Mm,
those candidates that meet the school's particular work culture. And so that's the crux of this, the most important part of this process is finding that. And then you have to train leaders as well to be able to identify and to see what are the flags, what are the things that we need to be looking for, the positive things as well as the things that are not as
mm.
desirable for our schools. And so that is something that we have to really work on because we have certain psychological kind of needs that we need to meet, both as school leaders who are trying to hire and also as candidates who want to find a job. Everybody has certain needs that they want to meet.
Mm.
But those things don't always necessarily match between the two sides, and we've got to find a good match. And that's what this process, the gift method, is about.
So gathering information and facts tends to suggest that it's more than just an interview process. Would that be accurate?
Oh, absolutely. So, it starts with identifying what the school's work culture is, and it's actually not saying this is what the school's culture is, but it's more about what is the desired work culture that we want to work toward. And then we design questions that match with the major components of our desired work culture. We create job descriptions that fit that. We set up an interview process that tries to find candidates as a wide a net as we can. We train the leaders, the hiring leaders within the school about what the process that we use is, how
Right.
to identify uh, candidates and really look toward their attitude, not just think about their skills that they have.
Mhm.
Anybody can learn, most people can learn skills, but attitude is naturally who we are inside, and
Yeah.
that can't be changed. And so we've got to get a mindset different for people who are doing hiring so that they can understand that part of it. And it takes some time to develop that. We have a very thoughtfully planned process about how we identify candidates, what kind of sources that we're using within the school. Every school has different needs. They have different financial resources, things that are available to them. So they got to look at that. All of the HR type processes that the school uses in communicating with candidates. And then finally, once people are hired, how do we onboard them into the
Right.
school once they're coming in? And that is part of the process as well, because you want people, if you've hired them and identified them, you want them to be successful. You want to set everyone up for success. So,
Yeah.
how do we do that? So, it's an entire system that is being put into place within the school. So it's not just any one part of it. And
Mm.
it's really a year-long process, to be able to bring people on board and to get them there. And it's not just something we do randomly. It's what I call aligning the arrows so that all of the parts are all going together and facing in the same direction, not just
Mm.
random arrows with people doing whatever and not really connecting into one central idea and purpose.
Rule number five, if I'm correct. So you in the book you have, I think it's 10 rules that
Yes.
you went throughout the chapters. We'll come back to that in a moment. We won't go through all of them. We want people to buy the book. But one of the statements you make that stood out to me the most was hiring is the most important work that a school leader does.
Yeah.
Now, when I first read it, I thought, gosh, that's a bold statement. I mean, there's so many elements that are important in the world of leading, particularly within schools, test scores, making sure the tech integrations, their safety of students, safety of staff, but hiring. So what is it that makes it your top priority?
Well, if we don't, and this applies not just to schools, but to any organization, if we don't have the right staff and what I say by the right staff, I just mean people that are the right fit for our school culture, our work culture. If we don't have the right people to support that culture, how is the school going to operate? And is it going to really be able to meet its needs? And if we can't meet our needs, we can't meet student needs, we can't meet family needs, we can't meet the needs of other staff members either, then it's going to be very hard to operate efficiently and effectively. And this is
Mm.
true of every organization, every workplace in the world is the same way. And so the most important work that we do is to set the foundation. it's sort of like building a house, Wayne. We don't, when we're building a house, we've got to have a proper foundation in place. We've got to have the structure of the house has to be solid. How we decorate the house once the walls are up and the drywall is finished and everything, but how we decorate and how we make the space a living, comfortable space and workable for what we need.
Mm,
That's up to individual tastes and how we can do things. And that's so teachers have plenty of agency to be able to do that within their classrooms and so on. But the foundation remains the same.
right.
And so that foundation is what any leader is doing in their organization when they're hiring, is that they are finding the right people to support the organization. And so if we don't have and even just one person, if they're intent upon doing it, they can easily completely disrupt the organization,
Mhm.
sometimes to the point of near destruction. And so it's incredibly important work that we're doing, and it cannot be underestimated how important it is. So, is it a bold statement? Absolutely, and it's bold because it's completely 100% true.
Yeah, yeah. And it lends itself back to, I think it was rule number two, attitude that you've already spoken about. But what I'm curious, and I also deliver a leadership program, we talk about exactly what you said, attitude being more important than skills and knowledge. But it's also hard to quantify, particularly with a candidate. Easier to see with people you're working with longer term, but how do you go about identifying attitude during the hiring process? Is there a particular method?
Well, this is where this method evolved from, is because when we have general conversations with people, um, we don't, we might hear some of their ideas and their views about things, but people can say one thing and their actions can be something else, and we may not necessarily know how they act, and we don't know how, they may genuinely feel something and they may have some ideas that they genuinely believe in, but that doesn't mean that we act in the same way and how we carry out our work and how we interact with others. And so we have to try to figure out what that is in the interview process. And that's the key that's missing in most interviewing procedures that we do as leaders,
Mm,
both within schools and in other organizations as well. I'm completely convinced of that. Instead, what we tend to focus on is skills when we're interviewing, and
yeah,
that's not going to get us to the attitude. So instead, we've got to focus on the attitude that people have and trying to discover what that is genuinely. So we have to very carefully identify what is the desired work culture within our organization.
mhm,
Generally, you're going to have 4 to 6 main ideas that are the most important, and then you're going to design questions around those important attitudes, the
right,
desired work culture attitudes that we want to make sure that we're hitting upon, that
mm,
everybody fully supports and believes in within the organization. And so we've got to design questions in an open-ended kind of a way
right,
that doesn't telecast to the candidate what we're actually looking for. So we've got
mm,
to design that open-ended question, kind of present a scenario to them and let them then answer from real examples of what they have done in the past. And so it actually works really well. So for example, uh, a question that we can use is, say, for example, can you tell us about a time when you were doing something within your school, when you were working with other colleagues outside your regular job description?
right,
Well, that's just telling a scenario. So people may or may not necessarily know what the purpose behind the question is, but then they're going to tell us something. So people are going to answer that question, and then this is what they will honestly do because I've sat through hundreds of interviews, so I know how it will work. They'll go, hmm,
The psychology behind it. Yeah.
hmm, yeah. Let me think about, and some of them will really struggle to come up with even one thing that they have done outside the regular classroom.
Mm,
Some of them, I tutored, a student or helped them after school, but that's just their job. That's not outside of the classroom.
yeah.
And so, some of them will have come up with nothing or very little. They'll say, yeah, well, back in 2002, I did da 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 da. Well, that's not very current. But others will say, "Oh yeah, we had this school sports day, and we were doing this, and I had this part of the job, and I was organizing students to do such and such, or we had a school play, and I was creating sets for kids, and that was a lot of fun, and it wasn't anything I knew how to do, and I was just asked to do it, but I did it." And it really turned out to be a lot of fun. And
Mm,
so that's what we're looking for is, and people will tell us about their experience and they will volunteer it. We don't have to say very much beyond asking the question. And that will tell us everything we really need to know is, does this match with what the school culture? The reason we would ask that question is we want to find team players, people who
right.
are willingly do things outside of their regular job description. They're not going to complain about it. They're going to just do them because they know it's for the good of kids and it's for the good
Mm,
of the school, and they're happy to do that. And they just naturally want to do it. So that's what the attitude is about.
okay. And then that would enable the concept of chasing down the red flags, I guess, based on their answer. So if they answer that they haven't really done anything, that would be a red flag, and then you can investigate that further. I'm
Yeah.
assuming. Yeah.
And they will be absolutely honest about it. I can remember a candidate once that we were interviewing and she just said, "I don't do anything outside the classroom. That's not my job." Okay. And
Hmm.
I don't respond. I don't say, "Well, that's the end of the interview," or, "You're
Yeah.
wrong," or anything like that. Okay.
Yeah.
And I just take note of it and we carry on with the interview and do the rest. But that's not a candidate that's going to fit for our organization, because we're looking for teamwork and we're looking for people that want to be part of that and they see school beyond just teaching content. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, teachers are more than just teaching content in front of the students in front of the classroom. They're about dealing with a whole student. And so we have to present a lot of different things within schools, not just teaching in a classroom periods 1 to 8 every day. That's just one part of what we do when we're educators.
There's another rule that stood out to me, Kelly, rule number 4, where you say it's better to keep a position unfilled than to hire the wrong person. Now, I understand the premise of that. However, thinking about it from a practical point of view, if I'm the principal of the school and it's August and we're about to start school in September and I've got vacancies in my teaching staff, I am sure that the temptation is to find somebody just to fill the gap. How do you avoid those circumstances?
Well, that temptation to fill a position is very strong. That's one of the psychological
Mm,
needs that a recruiting leader has to have. They want to fill a position and they want to do it quickly and they want to do it right away and
yeah,
as efficiently as possible. But sometimes we just don't have the right candidates and
right,
we're just not able to find them. And even if we find the right candidate, doesn't mean the candidate wants that position with our school. They have to also want to be in the school. And so the reason that we want to really emphasize finding the right people and leaving a position unfilled if we can't is that if we've got the wrong person, it's going to destroy the school's morale, the team morale, and so on. That is most likely going to happen. And even if it doesn't destroy it, it's going to make life very difficult for the other team members. It's going to make life difficult for the leaders within the school because they're going to have a very high needs candidate who is or person who comes in who's it's an employee is going to have a lot of needs and they're just not going to be able to make it And then when they're unhappy, they're going to destroy morale of those around them because they're going to be complaining all the time. And it's going to be
Mm.
very, very difficult. Sometimes you can find okay candidates who might have the right attitude. Maybe they're weaker in skills.
Right.
And if we can build those skills up, then okay, then we can hire them and we can build them up. Sometimes we can find candidates who might have maybe some of the attitude things we're a little bit unsure about, but then we've got to examine it more closely. Is this something we can live with, or is it something we'd rather not, live
Right.
with? And so we've got to look carefully at that and figure it out. And there's sometimes we just can't fill a position. So then we've got to come up with other ways to do it.
Mhm.
So just like what I said a little while ago when we were talking about the pandemic issues, one of the things that you can do is, okay, can an administrator go into the classroom and teach? That's what I
Right.
had to do when we were in that pandemic and some of the teachers couldn't come back. They were
Mhm.
doing the lesson plans and all that from home, from abroad, and we had ways that they could deliver some of the lesson online. But, in terms of having an in-person, instruction and a teacher there in the classroom, well, sometimes we had to do that. So every leader had to go in and teach classes. That is an alternative, so, could somebody teach an extra class during the day? So if we have a department of teachers, could somebody do some extra thing? Could we have a substitute teacher who comes in, who does some work for a while until we can come up with something else? There are lots of alternatives. And, Wayne, I've never had a situation that has been just impossible to find. There's
Mm.
always an alternative available. It's a
Mm.
matter of if we want to use them or not. And if we can do that, then let's do it. And that's at some point where you have to just make the decision as a leader and you have to say, okay, well, can I live with this? Maybe sometimes parents may not love that. The staff member who has to teach an extra class may not love it, but you don't just do it for free. You pay
Mm.
the people, you try to treat them well, you try to give them the support that they need so they can do that extra work. And generally, it's going to be just fine. And then, and we find then somebody within months or the next semester or whatever the situation is to be able to do that, to make it happen and make it work. And it always will.
Yeah. And what you're highlighting for all leaders that are listening, and I'm sure everyone's hearing it as well, is you need to be able to strategize in the beginning, have your plan A, B, and C, as you said. You need to be a decision maker and solve problems. These are all skill sets that are valid and necessary today and in the future. And I think it's a good message. Rule number
Absolutely.
7, you talk about train, train, train. And for me, being in this world as well, one of the things that I've experienced over my corporate career, this is an area where many companies fail. And I know you're addressing it to the hiring committees in the schools, but this also applies in the corporate world. HR tend to be the experts in the corporate world in hiring people, but more often than not, the final decision comes down to the leader of that group, division, organization, and they're often not trained about what they should be looking for. And then the decision is incorrect in many cases, the blame game starts, etc., etc. Hiring the right people is a skill. And as you say, you need to be trained in what to look for and educated in that process. How much time and effort is required for that training?
Well, when somebody is first going to university and studying about how to be a leader,
Mm.
I would say that probably if they're most schools, most universities don't train people on how to hire. They don't
Yeah.
at all. They might do, say, like, okay, students, college students, you're going to do a mock interview together, and one of you is going to interview, and the other one's going to be the candidate, and That's about it. And it might be just a very brief thing. Maybe they'll learn a little bit about processes, possibly through the HR point of view, from human resources point of view, but that's about all there's going to be. It's very limited. It's nothing about the psychology. There's nothing about actual strategies. I would be virtually certain that nearly no leader is trained that way.
Mm.
But as I mentioned, and that was certainly true of me. And I'm not saying anything against my university or anything like that. It's just that's the fact of the way it was. So I never got training in any school that I worked in as a leader about how to train. No system, no district that I worked with, no schools trained me on how to do it. I had to learn the processes through my own research, and when what I had to figure out, sometimes it's just through practice, through trial and error, and also learning by reading other books and learning about how to do this. Lots of conversations with people that I worked with on how to make this process work. And through trial and error, eventually, this is where this method and system came from.
Right.
The training part, whenever we have leaders, we have to train them each year about how to carry out this process. So every school, like I mentioned, has its own unique culture and its own unique way of doing things. So not
Mhm.
every place is going to be the same. So all new hiring leaders need to be trained in the process when they first come into the school, if they're going to be part of the hiring team. And then if there are changes in the process, the way that we're doing things, some of the rules, the regulations, and so on that govern hiring, then all of the team leaders need to know about that when they happen. And then we've got to set the system in and implement it once people are trained. And you do that just gradually. So we never just release a new hiring leader into the hiring mix without pairing them up with a veteran hiring leader,
Right.
going through the interview process together, talking about it afterwards, about what does this mean. Even if somebody is a veteran administrator who has done lots of hiring on their own, they still have to learn what the system is within the new school that they're a part of. And they're not just released on their own to do it. And then once they've learned what the system is, then they can begin doing it on their own. And I absolutely guarantee that everybody who does this process, they're always kind of wowed about the result because they just go, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about that. I never realized that this is what could happen, about looking for the attitude and what to watch for the flags and how to chase those down and to be able to kind of suppress this need to get the job filled without uh, you really finding the right person to do it." And so it's a process, a team process for sure, in doing this and getting hiring right. But boy, it makes all the difference for in the end result for what it will do for the school, because ultimately a whole team of people who come in as the new employees, they're going to support the school system so much more. They have the right attitude, and everybody around them, other team members, students, and families, they're going to notice that difference. They're going to see it. And within a matter of the first hiring cycle after that, those people are brought in, it's going to transform the school a little bit. But every hiring cycle afterwards, it uses this system, it will completely transform the school,
Right.
guaranteed.
Right. So the book details a full hiring workflow, if you like. As you mentioned, the whole process might take 12 months to implement. If we have any school leaders listening at the moment and they want to get started tomorrow, what is one change that they could make? What would you recommend is the first step that they should take?
Well, I think the very first thing is to really take a look at what your school culture is right now and what is the desired school culture that you want to work toward.
Mhm.
And it takes some frank conversation and reflection to be able to do that. But it's not impossible to do. And once you've as a school and school leadership have been able to identify where you want that desired work culture to work toward to look like, then you can begin designing the process to, as I outlined before, through the interviewing questions and all of that, you can begin designing that. But the first thing is really just assessing where are you right now and where do you want to be?
You mentioned towards the end that one of the unexpected outcomes of the whole process was that you're raising the bar with the new hires, and the consequence was some of the high performing veterans in the school now seem less so. Um, and I guess that creates a dynamic of, or potentially, some sort of pushback or resentment. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that is definitely something that will come about. And so people early on, they might be high flyers within the organization and they're doing seemingly very well, but then the new work culture doesn't, it's not necessarily totally against what they're believing in, but they just may not quite fit in with that. And they've got to retool a little bit. And that's not always comfortable. None of us really like change. That's not something that we enjoy. Just like your lead, when we had our lead off conversation about the pandemic, I mean, nobody's
Yeah,
going to say I enjoyed that process, absolutely not. I mean, health issues and all of that aside, I mean, the whole change and all the massive changes that we were required to undergo, both as staff and students and families, and it just unimaginable that we could go through
mm,
all that. But we do, and we adapt. And I think that's what happens within organizations too. The people in the work culture have to adapt. And if there's problems, then as leaders, we've got to identify them. We've got to help staff to be able to evolve their way of thinking. And most are going to. Most are going to see the need already. They're going to understand that, okay, I'm a little out of step with this. I've got to change. So, it's the three R's. It's either rethink the way they do things, relocate some other place, either another uh, position that fits them better within the organization, or maybe it means relocate to another school if they just aren't going to fit in, or retire
yeah,
all the way. So those are the three R's. And so that's what it is. So, and for the most part, people are going to rethink and they're going to readjust. They're going to make the changes that they need to do, and then they'll be just fine. They're going to find these people coming in, the new colleagues that they're working with, or have a different mindset, and they're going to go, I can learn from that. And most people are very growth mindset oriented, and they're going to just adapt just fine. There are going to
mm,
be a few who won't. And
yeah.
if that's the case, then okay, then they either need to get on board or move on. And we don't want people to move on. We'd like them to readjust, but that doesn't always happen.
For sure. It also got me thinking about talent pipelines. I was trying to envisage a scenario in a school where you might have a talent pipeline or a succession planning. Does that really exist within the school structure?
Well, in a quality school, absolutely it does. So,
Yeah.
that's the key also for a successful process is that you want to design a pipeline, particularly for leadership pipeline, so that people can move in from being working within their, say, like as a classroom teacher or
Mm,
assistant teacher, and then do they have a way to move up through the years into potential leadership roles as they come available. And you've got to train each, well, there's basically, well, 5 to 6 levels of leadership within a school organization, any organization. And so you've got to train them at each of the different levels of that leadership. And so that's a process even beyond. That's a new book to have that. And so that process about training them how to do that job is really vital. But then once they've learned the skills and the mindsets that go with each of those layers of leadership, then they're going to be a lot more successful. And if the people come from within your organization, well, they already then understand the work culture. They understand all the nuance of your organization. And so then they're going to be a lot more likely to be successful in the job. They're not going to have as many growing pains as somebody who comes in who's completely inexperienced with the culture of the organization of the school, and they don't because they've never been in it, and so they just don't know how it works. It's a challenge, and so it's better when we can to hire from within, but sometimes it's just not possible to do. And when it's not, then okay, then we have to make sure that the person coming in is going to be successful as well, that they get trained at their level of leadership so that they can be successful, that they've got a good mentor that helps them along the way, that there's a training program that supports them so they know what to do. And when that happens, they're going to be far more successful than they would have been if they're just kind of like, here's the job description, go. Here's your keys, go. Figure out what to do. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned at the beginning that there's a book prior to the gift hiring method. It's called Teach and Lead Abroad, I think. I can imagine there's a number of aspiring leaders, in this case, educators, school teachers, who have a dream, a secret dream of working internationally, working in schools abroad. Is there one piece of advice from that first book that you would give to people that might be thinking that?
Well, I think, that the thing to look for particularly is, if you want to, it's more than just traveling and more than just vacationing. So there's a difference between that and actually living abroad. So if it's something that you really are wanting to do, to live abroad and to work abroad, and if you have a family to raise them and kids in that experience, or if having a husband or a wife or a partner that you're traveling with, and having that experience of really immersing yourselves into that culture, then it's worth exploring and going into. But you have to make sure that you and all of the people that are in your family unit, that you're all part of that and you're all on board. And when you're able to do that, there's a world of opportunity that's out there. There are 14,000 plus schools, international schools in the world.
Mm,
So there's lots and lots and lots of opportunity for people to find jobs in great schools all around the globe in any country pretty much that they want to. And so it's just a matter of being able to find them. And it just takes time. Just like any job search, it takes time to do. And it's a carefully prepared process to make it happen. But once it happens, it can be incredibly rewarding once we found the right roles, right schools,
mm.
and the right roles.
And of course, in your case now, you've stepped away from the school leadership area. You've moved into running your own company, consulting. What are you doing in that field? How are you staying involved with the schooling system?
Yeah. Yeah. So after 32 years of working in education in schools, I retired at the end of June of 24. And so I'm now, but I wanted to still remain working. I'm not ready for the rocking chair yet. So I wanted to continue working in education, but so now I just do it in this different way. So what I'm doing is I focus a lot on my writing of the books. So for example, I wrote the gift hiring method after I retired. I finished writing that. I'd started it before, but I finished it and did all the work that I needed to do to get it published. I'm writing another book now. That's this one is getting kind of ready for a kind of a mentorship series of sorts that's dealing with different topics. So this first book is looking at dealing with the growth mindset and professional development and how we can grow in our careers
Mm,
through different ways to help to support our career enhancement and enjoyment of what we're doing. And then also, I part of my business, which is called EduNet Pro Consulting, is just about helping people around the globe who are interested in accessing this kind of career in international schools and how to help them to grow and either finding jobs. I'm not a recruiter, so I don't do recruitment for schools, and I'm not recruiting, specific candidates, but trying to help them to prepare themselves so that they can be better able to enter the job market and be successful at what they're doing. And then also just helping them in terms of mentorship for their career growth. And so I find that there's people all around the globe who are very interested in growing their careers, who want to be able to either get into the world of international schools, or once they're in it, they want to go even more, but they're not quite sure how to do it because they just don't have somebody who can help to kind of guide them with some ideas and help them to think about things in a different way. So I provide some both online classes that I provide for people, but I also just do individual one-on-one kind of mentorship as well and working with them. So altogether, it's still, I'm part of the education world, but I'm just doing it in this different way through my business, EduNet Pro.
How can people continue the conversation or get some support from you?
So if, I'm a very active on LinkedIn, so that's one way to be able to connect to me there. I'm very active in posting regularly and sharing ideas about what I do. I'm also, people can get in touch with me through my website and they can learn about the services that I provide. That is at edunetpro, edunetpro.com. And so my books are there as well as courses that I offer and the other services that I provide. I also work with schools too in helping to provide, helping them to be able to design systems for hiring that are going to be robust and helping to find quality candidates for their schools. So, and then I also work with other things like, for example, accreditation. I work with WASC as a volunteer for committees that are going into schools and do accrediting. So I do a lot of work with that as well. So, I'm pretty active with, I'm retired, but I still have plenty to do.
Well, we'll definitely link to both the LinkedIn and the website so people can track you down. Kelley, great conversation. Really enjoyed the book. Huge number of insights and tips for any budding school leader that's looking to change the way they're doing things at the moment. So thank you so much for being on the ET project.
Well, thank you so much, Wayne. I appreciate it, and thanks for the good words about the book. It's an important one, and it's one that I'm really pretty passionate about. So I'm glad to be able to share that, and I appreciate the chance to be able to talk with you, Wayne, about the book and about education in general. It's an exciting topic.
Well, all the best for the future. I guess we're going to have to come back together when the third book gets released.
All right, let's do that. It's a deal.
All right, bye-bye.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.